Okay, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening. It's certainly good evening for our guest here. My name's Kevin May. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of PhocusWire and your host for today's New Reality With. We're delighted to bring you this series of one-to-one interviews with industry leaders with a partnership through Salesforce. With them, you can reopen travel with support from Salesforce's work.com, and we can come back to that later on at the end of the show. So a very warm welcome to Ross Veitch. If you want to fire up your video there, Ross. So thank you very much for joining us from Singapore. It's very late in the day for you, but thank you very much. So for those of you who don't know, Ross is a former Yahoo head of engineering who in 2005 co-founded what was then called Berserk, a travel search engine based in Singapore. It became Wego in 2008 and has since gone on to become a significant player in a number of markets, especially more recently in the Middle East and the North African region. So welcome, Ross, to our series of Zoom side chats, as we call them. We really appreciate you spending the time. So for those that haven't seen one of these interviews before, what we try and do is get a sense of how you, as an executive, as an industry leader in the business, kind of initially kind of got through the first kind of stages of what was going on earlier this year, what is kind of happening now for you and your company and how things go forward, and then some more kind of big picture stuff and how you see things evolving over the next kind of 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, less about Wego and more about your opinions on the industry, which I'm sure you've have got many, having spoken to many times over the years. So again, so thanks, Ross. So first of all then, some reflections really, going back to January, February this year as things started unfolding. Did you get a sense, I suppose, based in Southeast Asia as you are, and with obviously we mentioned your focus on the Middle East, but you know, you're based in Southeast Asia. Did you get a sense then what had happened in China and was spreading slowly around Southeast Asia? But did you get a sense then, as I said, quite how dramatic and big it would be in terms of the tentacles of this coronavirus spreading around the world? Or did you think perhaps it would be contained, first of all?
Yeah, so firstly, Kevin, great to be here. Appreciate the invite. Good to reconnect. So yeah, I mean, I was spending my time pretty much between Singapore and Dubai. I sort of joke I'm like a resident of you know, Emirates and Singapore Airlines more than any specific country these days. But so yeah, from January, we were watching it pretty closely because there was little outbreaks all across you know, East Asia, right? So we saw it in, you know, we had small outbreaks in Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and you know, it was triggering some, you know, memories of SARS from you know, some time ago. So initially, I thought. I thought, you know, we may be lucky and it may be contained more or less to China. It was in February when we saw it really taking off in Iran that we knew we were going to get hit. And so as soon as we saw that, we basically instigated it, you know, like a hiring freeze and started, you know, watching carefully the discretionary spending. We sort of realized, so Iran's actually quite networked across the Middle East and into Europe. You know, despite sanctions, there's a lot of flights in and out. There's a lot of business that gets done. People moving, and you know, once it got completely out of control in Iran, it then quickly spread to you know, to Kuwait, to you know, Lebanon, Qatar, Saudi, UAE, and you know, throughout the rest of the region, which is sort of really the heart of our business now. So yeah, we sort of, you know, we realized there was going to be a big problem, you know, around about, you know, mid-Feb. Yeah, so up until then, we were kind of hopeful it was going to pass us by. It was going to be a sort of a China / East Asia phenomena, but yeah, unfortunately, things didn't quite play out that way.
So how do you? You said you did make some kind of strategic changes. I mean, how did you kind of prioritize what you needed to do? Because there is a sense sometimes where you cut early and you cut deep. or you take a more measured approach and see how things play out? Which one did you opt for?
So we opted for the latter, Kevin. So cut early, cut deep, bit of a cliche, I think. I think it's easy to sort of overdo things if you sort of follow that recipe. Fortunately, our business is relatively lean. You know, we're less than 200 people worldwide, and we don't have the fixed cost base of some of the larger online travel businesses that are more customer service intensive, or have thousands of people out there contracting suppliers. Over the years, we sort of had a maxim at Wego: if the answer to the problem is to hire a bunch of people, then we're probably trying to solve the wrong problem. So we try to focus on problems we can solve with technology as opposed to throwing bodies at them. So that said, we instituted a hiring freeze in Feb. When it was clear we're going to get hit, and it was March, we watched our revenue collapse to I think we finished March at something like minus 98% year over year. It was clear that we're in trouble. So we had an all hands meeting in March where we sort of announced a bunch of things, including across the board salary cuts, all for management, less for everybody else. What we did do is instead of we adjusted everybody's pay, so cash component was reduced. We made it up in equity. So we basically, up until March, only the senior management team had really been dealt in as shareholders via our share plan. So as of March, everybody who works at Wego is now a shareholder. And for as long as we're asking the team to take pay cuts, we'll continue to do that. So I think that's just it's only fair.
It's an interesting one. It's not something that I've heard certainly publicly or privately from any of the kind of the travel startups or the established travel brands that we've spoken to. Where did you get that idea from?
Well, I mean, effectively, it's we've had a share plan in place almost since day one. You've been reasonably generous, I think, dishing out equity to staff. It's a very effective motivation. It keeps people aligned long term. But if we're going to ask people to sacrifice, then effectively we're making them whole. But it's they're helping ease the cash demands on the business. So it gives them a small chunk of ownership, and if and when we get out of this and there's a liquidity event one day, hopefully that'll turn into a nice payday for them. So.
Okay, maybe we'll come back to the liquidity event at a later stage, because I was reading some notes earlier where that had been referenced about a year ago. I mean, what kind of conversations were you having with your essentially your advertising partners around that time? Were they pretty much saying the same thing? Okay, this is just crazy. We're going to have to shut things down. We'll be in touch in a couple of months. I mean, how did that kind of phase work out from a kind of a customer relationship perspective?
Yeah. So it varies dramatically. I mean, we work with there's close to 1,000 partners. They take all some global, some local, big, small suppliers, OTAs. So lots of variations. So what we have tried to do is to be flexible around the commercial models. So we've become a lot more creative in trying to find solutions that work for people during this period. So traditionally, we've run our hotel business as a CPC auction, very similar to Trip, Trivago, Google. So during this period, rather than have partners, completely, removed from the marketplace, we've come up with, performance-based commercials that make sense for them, right? So, for example, for a lot of partners, they've suddenly been hit by these waves of cancellations, right? So instead of paying per booking, we've now been like netting out cancellations and allowing them. So that works for them. That's fine. Moving to some partners to a CPA instead of a CPC. Again, if that's the way the partner's thinking about their business, that's fine. We'll find a way to accommodate. And on the flip side, we've also had some partners who have been stretched financially. Mm-hmm. A lot of OTAs who normally have negative working capital requirements, that's suddenly gone into reverse. A lot of them are still waiting to be made whole by some of the suppliers. The airlines owe them a lot of money. A lot of them have been forced to refund consumers. So we've tried to be understanding, and the way we prioritize it basically is sort of the way we. Any companies that are smaller than us, we've tried to be flexible and sort of understanding. We've got payment plans worked out with a bunch of people. Somebody's significantly larger than us, we're a little bit less forgiving. We sort of take the same approach to poaching and headhunting over the years, right? We try not to poach from startups, but the big guys pay game.
It's a crisis and everyone's in it together, but there are some still rules that remain in place. Then you'd say.
Correct.
Okay. And it's difficult to say that we have kind of reached the end of what that initial phase was, because there are re-emergence of infections in various markets. I mean, the US is in a right state, and Europe isn't perhaps doing so well in other countries now. But on the other hand, there has been over the last 6-7 weeks a change in the tone from almost all travel brands, in that they are trying to restart their businesses again and reinvigorate the markets. Was that a particularly defined time when you started realizing that, or is it just depending on where you're operating? And I mean, as we said right at the beginning, you're in the Middle East, that's your core area, Middle East and North Africa. Now that's your core area. Did it all seem to kind of start re-emerging at the same time, or not?
Yeah, the first thing to understand about the Middle East region through this period, basically, it got completely shut down. Our core markets, right? So the airlines parked the planes in the desert, the airports, stopped arrivals, departures. The hotels were shut. The GCC, which is our core business, basically all 6 countries went into hard lockdown. So it wasn't like the US or bits of Western Europe where it was sort of lockdown-ish. It was total, right? So we had zero revenue there for quite a while. But things are now beginning to open up again, and it's not all happening simultaneously, right? So we saw domestic accommodation open up across most of the MENA region, most of APAC as well. There's now we're seeing good volume there. We've seen domestic flights start up again in Saudi and India. We have some international flights coming in and out of the UAE now, and so we're tracking. Spent a lot of time tracking COVID stats of late, as I think we all do, and we're fortunate in that our core markets around the Gulf, so Saudi, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Oman, Bahrain, they're all relatively rich countries who have the resources to do what it takes to get this under control.
Right.
And the UAE things are now sort of at European levels in terms of new cases per capita. Mm-hmm. They're testing at rates far above anything in Western Europe, right? So they're like multiples of what the average European government's doing. So UAE's done a good job. Saudi was a bit slower, but now everything's trending in the right direction. So I think give them another couple of weeks, cases per capita will be down at European levels. Again, they're testing at higher levels in Europe. And positivity rates are coming down pretty dramatically. Okay. then the rest of the Gulf, it's a bit of a mixed bag, but they've all basically figured out what they need to do, and they've got the resources to keep things locked down for as long as it takes, basically, and they have the what do you call it? The tracking tracing networks in place already to, once they spot an outbreak, to then trace anybody who's been in contact with anybody, and so
yeah.
So we're lucky in a way. I think.
Do you think, just on that, luck, it does kind of play a bit of an important part, I think, sometimes. Do you consider yourself as a business lucky that your focus in recent years has turned to the Middle East, because for the reasons that you've just referenced? Because if you were in your position but your market was Europe, it would be a much more of a nervous situation for you as a business to kind of plot the rest of your year.
Well, actually, I think Europe's done a pretty good job overall, Kevin. Like, if you benchmark what's going on in most of the emerging markets of the world, who just don't have the resources to deal with this, who can't lock down, or if you look at what's happening in the US, most of Europe has dealt with this quite well. Not everybody moved as fast as they should have, but that's easy to say in retrospect. But if you look at most of Western Europe now, new cases per capita is down below sort of like 10, 12 per thousand per day, and it's a manageable level, right? So with a bit of social distancing, with some sensible wearing of masks, life can go on, travel can continue, and I think that's the rest of we're going to see that play out across the rest of the developed world. I think. We already see it across most of East Asia. I think what we're going to see is sort of a two-tier world, right? So countries that have COVID spread under control, countries that are still raging out of control. For those countries where it's under control, you're going to be able to travel from one to the other, probably without having to get tested, probably without quarantines. There'll be some exceptions, but logically that makes sense, right? You're not of any higher risk or threat to anybody if you're moving from a country at similar levels, with the caveat that they're testing enough for it to be statistically significant. I think if you want to travel from a country where COVID is raging out of control, you're obviously going to have to be tested, and or quarantined. So probably it means getting tested before you get on the plane, tested again when you're going through customs immigration.
Mm-hmm. But on that point, that's to move a little bit out of the Wego world, but into the kind of the travel world. Sure. That's a really difficult thing to implement. Perhaps not in the region that you're in, where they have, as you said, the investment and the wherewithal to just, to throw money at problems and fix them. But that's only perhaps, Dubai or Abu Dhabi and places like that. That might not be achievable in countless other airports, either in the region or in the intra-region or into other perhaps middle and longer haul markets. So then that becomes a bit more of a difficulty then.
Yeah, so look, I think we'll see a lot of, so because of that, because of the cost, because of the difficulty, and because of the fear, quite frankly, I think the amount of travel from countries where the spread is not contained to countries where it is obviously going to be reduced, right? So if you're a business traveler prepared to go through the hassle and the added cost, you'll figure out a way to do it. Otherwise, I think the volumes will be greatly reduced. However, between countries where spread's under control, I think we'll very quickly move to bubbles, corridors, green zones, where travel's still taking place. And, consumers will change their destination choices based on how safe, how easy it is to move between these different countries. I think that's inevitable. So the sort of and I actually think Europe sort of led the way in a lot of this, right? So the EU Commission was sort of publishing standards and criteria by which other countries would be allowed to send people to the EU, free of quarantine, without having to be tested. And I think that that approach, if not maybe the specific benchmarks, will be adopted worldwide. So if the if you're testing at an adequate level and your positivity rate is below a certain level and trending down, and your new cases per thousand are low enough, then you'll be your citizenry will be free to travel to other similarly safe places.
If you talked in our kind of first section where we were saying about how you were working with different partners, and some of them were on a CPC model, they switched over to a CPA. Are those changes that you think are likely to remain long term as the recovery continues, or do you think they will switch back to the business models that were working pre everything going nuts?
Good question. Yeah, we've always tried to adopt commercial models that make sense for our partners. So we try to see, make our marketplace flexible enough to accommodate however they, see their business. So I think we'll see a bit of both. Some things will change back, others will remain, I think.
What are the benefits for switching to, you say going from CPC to CPA? Then what's the benefit to? Is it to you or is it to them in the short term for that kind of switch? Because it is a fundamental difference, right?
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, sort of. I mean, so it means less risk for the partner if we're allowing them to pay us as a function of net bookings, or on some sort of rev sharing basis. But ultimately, all performance marketing, is managed to some sort of ROI metric or cost per booking metric. So regardless of sort of what the intermediate variables are, there's still profitability metrics you have to hit. So, and we actually find the marketplace works more efficiently if you have a variety of mechanisms. If you have everybody using the exact same logic and the exact same means of interaction,
right.
you can end up with some it's a bit of diversity helps, is sort of what we found.
Okay, right. So, I mean, that's interesting. So I'm curious now to just kind of get your thoughts on a bunch of other things that are perhaps not Wego related. So there has been some discussion, I suppose it was late last year, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think privately you and I spoke about this at the PhocusWright conference last year. There was a big hullabaloo made by Skyscanner. November, they launched what was a hybrid model, what they said, a hybrid model for meta search, where they were doing facilitated booking, they were doing original meta, and there were other things that they were playing with. And it was part of this new big bold world for meta search, and it was recognizing that people want to book in different ways. It's the adoption of mobile and all these kind of things. And I just wonder, one, what was your perspective on that at the time? And two, whether you think, as a result of what we've been through, kind of changes your thinking about fundamentally what is the kind of the future for the meta search model, which you have played in very successfully for 15 years.
Yeah, good question. So look, I think out of COVID, there's going to be a movement towards brands and platforms that are more trusted by users. And I think that plays to our advantage in our core markets. We've invested a lot in the brand, a lot in looking after users. Increasingly, we would like Wego to become a transactional marketplace. We would like users to be able to finish their travel transactions without leaving our platform. Our users tell us this when we survey them. So that means we are investing. We plan to invest more in facilitated booking or variations thereof. We've been spending time building our own payment stack. We've been beefing up our custom support team. So we have a lot of partners from outside of the Middle East who'd love to play in that part of the region, but can't or won't do the investments to get the UI localized, flipping it left to right, right to left. They don't want to have to deal with first level customer support, or struggle with the payments. There's a lot of alternate payment mechanisms that are necessary to really do it. So we're taking on some of that. We'll be plugging in some of our partners from other parts of the world and sort of bringing them to the market, and basically doing whatever it takes to make the market more vibrant. And we think that'll be good for users.
Yep. I mean, Skyscanner. Yeah, I mean, Skyscanner says that model has been successful for them so far. I suppose, despite the main proponent or the main kind of pioneer of that within the company, the CEO has recently left, Brian Dove, and he was the one who was really pushing it. But they say it's a really important part of what they want to do. We've actually just had a question here from the audience saying, what do you think about Skyscanner's book with Skyscanner model? I mean, you've kind of talked about it there. I mean, that facilitated booking thing wasn't particularly successful for TripAdvisor, which has enormous scale. That was hotels. Maybe it's a different type of thing. That wasn't particularly successful for them. Do you sense that was a timing thing for them, or do you think it was a timing thing for the market? It just wasn't ready for it. I mean, and it's something that you're interested in. What's the kind of difference, and how do you think it's going to shake out?
I think the difference with Trip was that, similar to Google with AdWords, they were making more money from their advertising lead gen business. So the partners were happy to spend more of their margin on referrals, using that method to get them into their own environment, so they could then upsell and remarket to them than they were to pay in commissions for a customer, which was perhaps not as fully branded, if you like. So from our perspective, I think one of the differences with us, so we're trying to provide to a user the full gamut of travel products, and we focus on flight hotel today. We've got activities launching quite soon. And then, we want to follow up quickly with, everything else within the universe of travel that a user may want to buy. So pre-trip, in-trip, and I think a transactional platform, makes a lot more sense if you want to, make that easy for a user.
So what is it was flights and hotels for many years, Ross. I mean, what is it that's kind of triggered your thinking into either wanting to or needing to add activities, presumably car hire, travel insurance, all those kind of elements into it? Is it because you want to become an all-round kind of more one-stop shop, for want of a very overused kind of phrase?
So we've got an app install base of about 40 million people now, and the business is really app-centric. I think in an app-centric world, people are less inclined to install 40 or 50 apps and bounce around the way that they do on the web, right? So it's our ambition to help our users and to satisfy as many of their needs within the realm of travel, be it informational or transactional. And it's easy to do that, frankly, in a mobile app world than it was on the web. We have been laser focused on flights and hotels for quite a few years now, but if you go way back, years ago we did tackle, we built car meta, we did packages, we did dynamic packaging. I sort of got to a point where we're stretched too thin. None of those were really moving the needle. So at one point we just culled the whole lot of them. So been laser focused on flights and hotels for a number of years, but we're now at the point where it makes sense. And one of the ways we're tackling this, Kevin, we've taken a bit of inspiration from sort of WeChat, Baidu, and Ali, in that they each have these sort of mini app frameworks whereby a third party can develop mini apps, plug them into their ecosystem, take advantage of their payment stack, their registered user information, a whole bunch of other user profiling and services, and basically set up a mini store within those those apps. So we've been spending a bit of time on that during some of the COVID related, wouldn't say downtime, but we've been spending time on this. This is one of the ways we're going to address all these different verticals. So
you said it's Alibaba. You've drawn inspiration from them and from WeChat and Weibo, and all things to all people. The phrase you didn't use was super apps, which is perhaps a phrase that we are slightly more obsessed with over here, certainly journalists, because it just sounds great, and it allows us to talk about the potential for other. A super app in my mind is not only travel, it's everything else. So
yeah, exactly.
So you buy a TV, and I'll buy a weekend break to Paris at the same time if you've got lots of money, which I don't. But that's the idea, is that it's one place to do all your shopping needs. What is your sense of where? I mean, you referenced some of those. Where do you think the next super app might emerge, or indeed, do you agree with some where they say Google is the next kind of super app because of what they've been doing in travel over time and what they clearly have planned ahead for them?
Yeah, I mean, Google, it's really, the Android is a platform, with extensions out to the web. There's not an app per se, it's sort of an ecosystem, but, they're sort of, got a finger in most things, online in some shape or form, right? Mm-hmm. I think WhatsApp is extremely well positioned. So WhatsApp / Facebook / Instagram, very well positioned to extend into payments, into commerce. And I'm actually been surprised how long it's taken them, given that the obvious models from China to follow. But they're moving in that direction now. So our ambition is not to be a super app per se, to be a super-ish app within the realm of travel. Sure.
Super-ish app, okay, yeah.
But
so slightly reined in ambitions almost.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to build. We're not going to be the payment. The wallet you're going to use to pay for your ride hail or your coffee in the morning. Mm-hmm. But within the realm of travel, we would like for the markets that we're going after, we'd like to satisfy as many needs as we can.
Do you get sorry, go ahead. Yeah, go for it. Go.
What the inspiration we are taking from the big Chinese players is more technical, right? So it's around creating a bunch of libraries and a framework, and then a bridge between the native operating systems, Android and iOS, that'll enable native-like performance, but that leverages services that we're going to expose and make available to third parties, and then relatively quick to develop language and reusable elements, so widgets and a common design library. So rather than trying to integrate every partner across every vertical and every market we want to tackle, we're going to do the main ones and then make this available for other people who want to sell on our platform. That's the idea.
Okay. Do you get as irate about it's not the emergence of Google anymore, is it? Can you believe it's 10 years since they bought ITA software? I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? But do you get as irate as others, many of those that you have shared a stage with at Web and Travel over the years? I'm thinking of people like Rod Cuthbert, Bobby Healy, who are very vocal about their irritation, I think would be the diplomatic word, of the dominance and the influence of Google. Does that irk you as much as it does them, or do you consider, well, that's just capitalism, that's what we have to do? Or do you lean towards their end of things and argue that there should be some form of regulation or, antitrust and all those kind of things.
Yeah. Well, the parts of the world where we, where we focus most of our business, there's no, the regulators very rarely get involved in any sort of, so it's kind of moot. But I do think Google is close to a monopoly on search in pretty much all markets worldwide, exceptions, Russia, China, South Korea, and it's not illegal to have a monopoly, but it should be illegal to then exploit that monopoly to move into verticals downstream that are dependent on that monopoly. I don't think they should be prevented, but it should be regulated or done at arm's length. Force them to spin it out. And it's sort of been interesting to watch the the hearings today, the last 24 hours. But
yeah,
I'm not,
indeed.
I don't think anything's going to get done until after the US election. So I think this is more theatre than anything at the moment. But
yeah, indeed. Okay, right. So we're in our last 5 or 6 minutes here. So just a couple of things to kind of finish us off then, Ross, if we can. I mean, what would you say is probably the biggest pain points in your model of meta search working with OTAs that perhaps still needs to be solved? So that's the first part. And what would you say is the biggest wider pain point in the industry that needs to be solved, whether it's something to do with passengers and airports, or airports is the one that usually gets brought up all the time, but I'm curious as to what you think. So 2 parts: your actual world that you operate in very well and closely, and the wider world.
Well, right now nobody's paying each other, right? So it's the world.
Well, that's a fairly big problem, right?
That's a fundamental problem, yeah. Actually, there are some notable exceptions, and I have to say, we've had some of our longer term partners, bigger, well capitalized. We've put in front of them some proposals to prepay substantial amounts of revenue for the next 12 months or so. They've very generously stepped up and accepted, written some pretty big checks in return for some discounts, and that's definitely helped ease things from our side. Other pain points: attribution's getting complicated in an app-to-app world, and with browsers getting increasingly locked down, closed to third-party attribution. So that's sort of forcing us to think more and more about becoming this transactional marketplace where instead of searching with us, booking somewhere else, you're searching with us, you're booking on our platform, and somebody else is the merchant of record and doing the customer service. So that's what else? Those changes around the third-party tracking also mean a lot of the marketing channels that we've been dependent on for the last 5 years or so, both in the mobile app acquisition world, but also on the web, are going to struggle to survive. So increasingly, we're looking at Facebook and Google advertising duopoly. Apple's in there, Amazon's in there, sort of, not really for travel, but so some of these changes, which are good for user privacy, are also threatening to a lot of the advertising media ecosystem. So that's something we've been thinking about.
Just on that, I mean, Ross, you mentioned the A word, Amazon. They were also in those hearings. Jeff Bezos was in those hearings yesterday. I mean, as journalists, we've been obsessed with the idea of Amazon kind of making a decent foray into travel just because it makes for great headlines, and it's another power player in the industry. Gives people lots of things to think about. I mean, why do you think they haven't played a card yet, given the influence, brand, data ability that they have? Why haven't they not played their hand in travel yet? And do you think this is an opportunity for them to perhaps in the circumstances that we're in this year and going forward, this is a better opportunity for them to play their hand finally, or not?
I think they've got some pretty amazing multiple core businesses that are humming along quite nicely. They've actually been turbocharged as a result of everybody being locked up at home for several months. So I suspect they'll stick to their knitting for the time being. I mean, I have been surprised they haven't spun out AWS yet. I thought that should have happened years ago. I think that would probably unlock a lot of value and free them up to take more share competing, like selling their compute services to other online retailers who may be hesitant currently to work with them. But I suspect they'll have a crack at travel eventually. I mean, it's pretty significant category, and the ambition over there seems pretty limitless.
Yeah, indeed.
But acquiring their neighbor in Redmond might be a good way to start.
Okay, and last of all, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, this was written on some of the research that I was saying. You said last year, public listings and things like that weren't out of the realm of possibility for Wego at some point. I mean, this year has probably destroyed any idea of that in the very short term. But is that still part of the medium to long term kind of liquidity event as you vocalized it earlier?
Yeah, look, so we've been managing the business so we can go public at some point. We've been growing over the last 5 years, over 50% a year. Been profitable for a couple of years, which was fortunate coming into this. Obviously, those plans have been pushed out a bit, but I'm a bit more bullish than some in the industry about how long this is going to take to come back. So I think this basically pushes everything out about 12 months, maybe a bit more.
Okay.
But yeah, and where there's kind of two ways to approach COVID, right? So some travel companies have decimated the teams and gone into hibernation mode. We've had our guys actually doubling down, working harder than ever, trying to innovate. We've got a bunch of new stuff, almost ready to release upon the world. A lot of it within the travel category. We've also been building some stuff out of travel that sort of leverages our app install base, but it's not really dependent on the travel industry. It's kind of like a hedge if it takes longer to come back. So expanding into shopping, doing some interesting stuff around cashback. So it'll be we're going to leverage, basically building a loyalty program into Wego, but also launching a new brand and a new service. They'll have a standalone life outside of Wego and travel. So
these are all very interesting. You mentioned them right at the end as we're finishing up. I mean, this is brand offshoot type stuff, isn't it? No, brilliant that you were pacing yourself. But these are interesting kind of things that you're doing. I mean, looking at other products almost.
Yeah, and trying to think about what assets do we have as a business? How can we leverage them? What's actually resonating with consumers at the moment? Where are the opportunities? And we're lucky. We work in a lot of markets, so we see a lot of ideas, and it's easy to sort of look at things that are working in one part of the world and look for the patterns. So anyway, we've got a bunch of stuff that's going to be hitting the market soon, which we hope is going to accelerate our recovery. But we think our core markets will come back relatively strong because the governments have done what it takes to suppress COVID. And hopefully, other governments that have done the same thing will figure out arrangements so that people can move around again. Sooner rather than later.
Okay. Before we went on air, we were discussing when would be the next time that we would actually see each other face to face, because we have seen each other almost every year at the Web in Travel conference in Singapore, going back to goodness knows when for me, 2006, 2007. So I hope that is sooner rather than later. Ross Veitch from Wego, thank you very much for joining us. So as we wrap up this interview, we'd like to thank once again, our partner Salesforce for working with us on these one-to-one interviews. You can embark on a new safe era of travel with Salesforce CRM. Lots of details about that are in the story that will accompany this interview on the replay on PhocusWire.com. We encourage you to go and read that and hear what they've got to say. There was an interview that I did with them as well recently. They were talking not solely about Salesforce, but just about some of the issues that they'd encountered along the way when they were dealing with their partners. So it's a great partner for us with this series. Last of all, again, thanks ever so much, Ross, for joining us so late in the day for you, fairly early in the day for me. Most of my colleagues are probably only just emerging from their slumber. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, mate. Bye.
Cheers.